Leave the World Behind is a literary fiction, thriller, suspense novel written by Roman Alam, whose family immigrated to the United States from Bangladesh in the 70s. This book was nominated for a National Book Award in 2020, the year that it was published, and it is something. I really want to say that I like it, but I'm still not sure. I finished it like a week ago and then watched the movie maybe 2 days ago. And I'm going back and forth on it. I don't know how I feel about it, but we're going to talk about both of them today. Before we get into my thoughts about the book, let's read the synopsis, shall we? Leave the World Behind is a magnetic novel about two families, strangers to each other, who are forced together on a long weekend gone terribly wrong. Amanda and Clay head to their remote corner of Long Island, expecting a quiet retreat from life in New York City, quality time with their teenage son and daughter, and a taste of the good life in their luxurious home they've rented for the weekend. But with a late night knock on the door, the spell is broken. Ruth and GH, an older couple who claim to own the home, have arrived there in a panic. These strangers say that a sudden power outage has swept the city, and with nowhere else to turn, they have come to the country in search of shelter. But with the TV and internet down and no phone service, the facts are unknowable. Should Amanda and Clay trust this couple, and vice versa? What has happened back in New York? Is the holiday home isolated from civilization a truly safe place for their family? And are they safe from one another? Dun dun dun! These are the questions. Do we get any answers? Let's get into that part. When I started reading the book, it took me 3 rereads of the first chapter to finally get into it. I kept picking it up and I was like, this does not seem interesting. When is the good stuff going to start? So finally I got past the first chapter, and I guess I'm glad that I did. It did get better, but it still left me with many questions. Amanda's character, who is the main mom in this book, is really annoying and is racist. And I don't understand why. Like, obviously racism exists, but I don't understand why her character had to be racist. In the first chapter, there are multiple moments of her just saying really weird things about minorities. But the narrator kind of lets us know that she knows that this is problematic. And because George and Ruth, the homeowners, are Black, it does bring another level of like mistrust from Amanda. And so I guess that makes sense. It was just weird. It was like, okay, here's another Karen. But when they show up, she's like, how do we know that they own this house? How could these Black people own this house is the question. And so it's really interesting. It also introduces, the book lets us know that GH and Ruth are Black. And I was going to say based on Amanda's behaviors, we're supposed to assume that they're white, but I think that is problematic. So I don't know why books always, it's like you don't realize the main character is white until they let you know that another character isn't. And I kind of hate that. When George and Ruth do arrive at the cabin there, or at the house, it reminds me of the movie Knock at the Cabin by M. Night Shyamalan, because these strangers just randomly show up while this family is on vacation. And so as soon as that happened in the book, I was like, ooh, it's about to go down. And nothing actually went down. So they show up with the news that there's a blackout on the whole East Coast, not just New York City, except for at their house, which doesn't make sense because they don't have solar panels or anything, but it's just not explained why they still have power and no one else does. But anyway, Ruth and George explain to Amanda and Clay that they heard on the radio about this blackout, but the radio is never used at any other point in this book. The whole time, and let me know if I missed this in the comments, but the whole time I'm like, go to your car. They're trying to check the TV, they're trying to pick up the phone, they're trying to check their cell phones, nothing's working. And I'm like, if you don't go to the car and try the radio, like, why isn't anyone trying the radio? And Clay at one point gets into the car to try and go to town to find out what's happening, pick up newspaper, and even in that scene he's not turning on the radio. Wouldn't that be... Anyway, that was my biggest pet peeve with the book. The whole time I was like, why hasn't anyone tried listening to the radio yet? Speaking of Clay's character, as I was reading the book, I was like, this man is so silly. And in the book, as I was reading, I kept picturing Paul Rudd playing the dad, because it's like, everything that's happening is very serious, but the dad is just acting so silly. And I'm like, Clay is just, it's giving Paul Rudd. That's not who they cast in the movie, but in my head, Paul Rudd is Clay. So the last chapter, I would say the last chapter of the book and the last scene in the film are kind of similar. I can see the influence, but also very different, which we'll talk more about later. But I really, as I reflect on reading the book, I think the last chapter was pretty good. I liked the way the book ended. It felt way more intentional and thoughtful than the movie. And as I was talking to someone asked me if I had watched the movie, and I was like, no, I'm reading the book. And they were like, the movie ending feels like a better book ending, so you'll probably enjoy it more. And I can see what they mean, and I do think it is more enjoyable in book form than it is in movie form. But we'll talk more about that. All in all, as I read the book, I was actually surprised that it was turned into a movie, because it all takes place essentially in one place. They're in this house the whole time. Again, Clay goes and tries to drive into town and fails at that. And they go meet the neighbor, and, you know, the kids are in the forest exploring things, but it's all basically in one place. And so to me, it felt a lot more like a play than a movie, but they made it into a movie and they're trying the best. And so let's talk about that. The book, Leave the World Behind, is only 270 pages, I think. The movie is at least 2.5 hours, maybe under 2.5 hours. So I knew, knowing how short the book was, I was like, they are gonna add a lot to this movie. And I was curious what that was going to look like. I would say they did a decent job. I think the scenes that they added were very helpful in making it more entertaining. It adds more suspense and more curiosity. Because in the book, I describe the book as if you've seen the movie, if you've seen the show or read the book Station 11, you know they're in a city and all these chaotic things are happening. And so they're in the thick of it and they need to get away from it. Whereas in Leave the World Behind, they have no idea what's happening. They're very far away from it, but they know something is happening. So they're trying to figure out what to do. Leave the World Behind feels like if you were in Station 11, but you were in the woods while everything was going down. And so they definitely had to add some stuff to it to make it more interesting for a movie. And that's exactly what they did. My first bone to pick with the movie is George and Ruth's characters being much younger in the movie than they are in the book. In the book, I think they're in their 60s and they're a married couple. In the film, Mahershala Ali is George, and Mahershala Ali is 49. I don't know how old his character is supposed to be. I don't know how old George is supposed to be in the movie, but he's only a 49-year-old man, so not 65. And Ruth is his daughter instead of his wife. So she's in her 20s. They don't really tell you how old she is. But I don't like that part. I don't like that change. Mostly because they're talking about how long they've owned this house. And George is like, oh, we bought it 20 years ago. If George's character is indeed 49, then he would have been 29 when he bought that house. I personally think it's unrealistic. But he works in finance. So maybe if he was in his career for a few years, I don't know, 20 years ago, maybe that house wasn't millions of dollars, but that's a bougie house for a 29-year-old to have bought. He was married, so maybe his wife was also rich. Maybe there was family money. I don't know. But it feels very unrealistic for a 29-year-old to have bought the house. But I'm broke, so what do I know about having money? Absolutely nothing. There's also, it really irritated me in the movie, George would reference we, as in like, this is our house, we bought it. And it felt like in the context, he was referring to Ruth, his daughter, who was not the owner of the house. He was the owner of the house. And so I know it's semantics, but it felt like they changed a whole character and a relationship for the film, but didn't change the script. Like at one point it was supposed to be Ruth was supposed to be the wife, and then they made a change, but didn't make the edits to the script. So that was a little bit annoying to me. I'm assuming they changed Ruth into a younger person to attract a younger audience. This is the actor who plays Ruth. I think her name is Mahala. I can't recall right now. I love her. I loved her in Bodies, Bodies, Bodies. I love her in Industry. She is fantastic. but I wish Ruth was older. Another difference from the book to the movie that I noticed is there just being in general more conflict with everyone. George's character has a gun in the film that ends up coming up in a very tense scene that is not in the book. And it felt, again, I know sometimes for films you just have to add conflict, but it did feel unnecessary. They witness a lot more happening in the world than they do in the book, which feels necessary, again, to make it more interesting. But that is also not in the book. So I think if you're deciding whether or not to read the book after watching the movie, if you appreciated all of the extra things that happened outside of the house, you're not going to like the book, is the moral, the moral of that story. Another thing I hated was the dancing. Julia Roberts and Mahershala Ali dancing to Next made me cringe. Oh, I'm a little traumatized by that song because it used to come on in the car. My mom would be driving me to school every morning and that song would come on and I'd be like, this is the most inappropriate. The song is so inappropriate. And so I hate the song because it made me uncomfortable being in the car. But then it's also like, why would Julia Roberts, Amanda's racist, you're telling me this racist white woman, this problematic white woman is going to be listening to Next? Okay. I wonder if Michelle Obama was like, you know what song I would dance to in this moment? If you didn't know, Barack and Michelle produced this film. Anyway, I thought it was ridiculous. And then they have a moment. Amanda alludes to wanting to kiss George, and it was out of nowhere, completely unnecessary. She's like, oh my God, they're dancing with each other. And she's like, we're both married. And was this a moment? Was this supposed to be a moment? Because it absolutely was not. But go ahead. The film Leave the World Behind was adapted for screen by Sam Esmail, and he also directed the film. I thought he did a really good job. I think the additions were, again, a bit strange, but necessary. And I loved it. I think there are some angles. I'm trying to describe, I'm not a film major, like, don't come for me. But there are some shots that are a bit dizzying, actually. There was one that I didn't like at all, and I had to like look away from the screen because it's so much movement happening. There are some zooming in shots that I thought were really interesting and really brought some more character to the film that I wasn't expecting. I really liked the way that he directed, and I also think the cinematography was amazing, and the cinematography was done by Todd Campbell. So great work to the both of them. There is one bone I have to pick. Mahershala Ali is always, like, half his face is dark. He's always in the shadows. And there's one scene where he's sitting on a couch across from Julia Roberts. She's bright-faced. You can see everything clearly. But when it goes back and forth between the two of them, half of his face is in the shadows, like mine is right now. Not a cinematographer. But I kind of hated it. And I can understand the intention. They want Mahershala to be a little more ominous, a little bit more curious, a little bit more untrustworthy than I think his character in the book was. And so it makes sense to like put him in the dark, but I didn't like it because it felt lazy. Like usually when a darker skinned person is in a scene with a lighter skinned person, they have to choose who to light better. But because they weren't necessarily in the scene together, I didn't feel like that was necessary. So the artistic intention, I can understand, but I would have preferred seeing his whole face. Maybe that's just my opinion. I came across a thread on Twitter about all of the biblical Easter eggs in this film. There are a lot of things I'm sure I'm not discussing that would be intriguing to other people. So I'm gonna link some of those conversations below if you wanna be a part of those. But yeah, those are my thoughts without trying to spoil too much. Those are my thoughts on the film. So let's talk about how the book and how the movie end. There's a lot more in the movie than there was in the book. But the very last chapter of the book, the daughter wakes up, I can't remember her name, but she wakes up in the middle of the night and decides to explore. I think it's important that the book let us know that children are smarter than their parents think. Children are more aware and attentive than their parents think that they are. And the daughter in this book demonstrates that very well. So she wakes up one morning and she's like, it's been 3 days. Something's happening. She wants to know what it is. She knows that there's a house nearby that they haven't gone into, and she is going to go check it out. The parents wake up and think she's gone missing, so everyone's panicked. But she was like, I need to figure something out. So she goes to this house. She finds some snacks. She pours herself a glass of juice. And she sees a DVD player and all of these nice things. And I believe she brings them back. I can't remember exactly if she just tells them that they were there or she brings back stuff. But and they are panicking because they were like, where is she? But she comes back. In the movie, they're panicking, looking for her. She goes off and has found this house. And the house has a bomb shelter. I can't remember what the word is. But they've done a lot of work to prepare this house for any chaos. But you find her in the house scavenging through all this food. She's at a table and it's all these sugary sweets. And in the movie, it feels like she has been without food for weeks. She like walks into this house and is like, oh my God, they have food. They've only been on vacation for 3 days. Like, she has eaten. Maybe they didn't make this clear in the movie, but in the book, they have had every single meal necessary. They baked a cake. They're like, we're on vacation while all of this is happening. But in that movie, in that scene, it made it feel like she'd been starving. And so I was like, what is happening here? And then the most irritating, I'm not a Friends person, okay? I'm a living singles person. But she's been trying to finish the series finale of Friends, and the internet goes out, so she can't finish it. And in this house, in preparation for Doomsday, they have a wall of DVDs. Everything you could ever want to watch, they have. And she finds the last episode of Friends and turns it on. And that's how the movie ends. And I hate it. I hate it so much. Anyway, for that reason only, I'm like, go read the book. Give this little girl some credit, because it feels like they just minimized her to this like teenager who only wants to watch TV while the world is ending. Which, I mean, it is in the book a little bit, but not like that. And so for that reason, when we get to the question of which is better, the movie or the book, this one is actually really hard because I hated the first chapter, but I loved the last chapter way more than I loved the book. And so, I mean, way more than I loved the movie. Which is better? The book. I'm gonna have to give it to the book once again. If you hated the first chapter and loved the last chapter as much as I did, let me know in the comments. Let me know. There are some mixed feelings about this movie. I know people are like, now is not the time, read The Room. And I'm like, Station 11 came out in the middle of the pandemic, so that's what Hollywood does. They read The Room pretty well, actually. And don't care. Anyway, those are my thoughts on the book and the movie. Next week, we're going to be talking about The Color Purple. I am in the middle of the book. I watched the movie. I thought I had seen it before. Anyway, we'll talk about it in next week's video. So make sure you subscribe so you don't miss it, and I'll see you then.